The winter of 1802 pressed its gray breath upon London when Amelia Hargrave first understood how swiftly a reputation could crumble. Once greeted with warm smiles and gentle curtsies, she now walked the narrow marketplace aisles beneath lowered eyes and whispered judgments that clung to her like frost. Her father's sudden death had left behind not an inheritance, but a ledger drowning in debt, an unraveling so swift that every door which once opened at her approach now closed with decisive finality. On this morning, as she examined a modest bundle of carrots at a stall she would never have visited in her former life, two women nearby angled their bonnets together and murmured, "A Hargrave reduced to buying scraps, how pitiable." Another added, "They say she seeks employment. Imagine a lady cooking for wages." Amelia held her chin high, though humiliation burned in her throat like swallowed embers. Dignity was the only possession she still fully commanded. A sharp wind swept through the market, tugging at her worn cloak as if urging her onward, urging her to accept that the world she belonged to had vanished. She pressed a coin into the vendor's hand with quiet steadiness, then stepped away to avoid further gawking glances. The sky threatened snow, though no flakes had fallen yet, and the air tasted of soot and distant rain. When she reached the postal counter, the clerk avoided meeting her gaze, sliding a sealed envelope toward her with the indifference reserved for those who had slipped from society's ledger. She recognized the crest immediately, a black raven embossed in silver, the emblem of Ravenshire Hall. Her heart thudded in a mix of disbelief and guarded curiosity. Inside the letter waited an offer, scandalous, humbling, yet impossible to refuse. Duke Edmund Ravenshire required a household cook of refined talent for a string of formal inspections and royal engagements. Her late mother's teachings, once meant only to refine her accomplishments as a gentlewoman, had turned her into a skilled hand in the kitchen. A talent that, in better days, would have been merely charming, was now her salvation. The terms were generous, the duration unspecified, and the tone was impeccably formal. Still, she felt the weight of the choice crushing her chest. To accept would be to sign away the last remnant of her former identity. Yet the alternative, starvation, debt collectors, the relentless grind of poverty, left no room for pride. 2 days later, a hired carriage rattled toward Ravenshire Hall through a countryside washed in muted winter light. Amelia watched the moors stretch endlessly, barren yet majestic, like a reminder that beauty could persist even after ruin. The estate emerged slowly through the mist, towering stone walls, manicured hedges, and enormous windows that reflected the pale sky. It was a world built for people untouched by disaster, a stark contrast to the tremor of uncertainty coiled in her stomach. Upon arrival, she stepped out onto the gravel drive, smoothing her modest skirts, willing her breath to steady. The Duke greeted her in the entrance hall, framed by tall arched windows and the glow of a crackling fire. Edmund Ravenshire was younger than she expected, only 26, with sharp features carved by restraint rather than cruelty. His dark hair fell neatly, his posture disciplined, his expression unreadable except for the faint, cool detachment of a man who had disciplined his heart into stillness. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Miss Hargrave," he said, offering only a slight inclination of the head, "your arrival is timely." She curtsied, steady though weary. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. I must be plain," he continued, hands clasped behind his back. "This arrangement is strictly professional. You are here to cook. That is all. Ravenshire Hall has endured more gossip than I care to entertain, and I do not require further complications." A pause, measured and deliberate. "Let me assure you, Miss Hargrave, you are not wife material for a man of my station. I trust we understand each other." The words struck sharply, yet Amelia made no outward sign of injury. She had expected unkind assumptions, even condescension, but to have her unsuitability stated so plainly sliced deeper than she anticipated. Her pride wavered, but she held firm. "Your Grace," she replied with a calm she carefully forged. My sole intention is to perform the duties for which I was hired. Nothing more. For a moment, something unreadable flickered in Edmund's gaze. Perhaps surprise at her composure, perhaps the faintest crack in his frost-bound demeanor. He nodded once. Very well. Mrs. Linton will show you to the kitchens. Amelia followed the housekeeper through echoing corridors, past portraits of stern ancestors who watched her with disapproving eyes. Yet beneath the sting of shame, a quiet resolve began to form. She had survived London's whispers and the collapse of her family name. She would survive this too. If the Duke wished to keep her confined to the kitchen, she would succeed there with excellence, so unwavering it could not be ignored. As she stepped into the vast, warm kitchen, the scent of fresh herbs and roasting roots enveloped her like an unexpected embrace. She set down her modest bag and looked around, absorbing the space that would now shape her days. Despite the ache of what she had lost, something within her steadied, an ember refusing to die. Far above, from a balcony overlooking the hall, Edmund watched her disappear below and found himself unsettled. He had hired her for convenience, nothing more. Yet her quiet dignity lingered in his mind longer than he intended. It was an irritation, a curiosity, one he had neither invited nor desired. And just like that, the first shift in their fates began in the early days of her employment. Amelia rose before dawn, lighting the kitchen hearth while the estate still lay under a veil of pre-dawn quiet. She worked with a meticulous grace that surprised even the senior servants, who had expected clumsiness from a fallen gentlewoman. Instead, she moved with deliberate precision, weighing spices with a jeweler's care and preparing her broths and pastries as though each dish carried a private meaning. Word of her refinement drifted upward through Ravenshire Hall like the scent of warm brioche, eventually reaching Edmund Ravenshire himself. He observed her at discreet intervals, glancing into the kitchen doorway as he passed, surprised to find her presence neither meek nor resentful but calm, almost luminous, as if adversity had honed her rather than diminished her. One morning, Edmund lingered longer than intended, watching as she tested the temperature of a sauce with the back of her spoon. She did not notice him, and something about the scene unsettled him. Perhaps the quiet confidence that contradicted his assumption that she would flinch beneath scrutiny. Instead, she seemed most herself when unobserved, a paradox he found both vexing and oddly compelling. He left without speaking, irritated by the faint tug of curiosity she inspired. She was merely his cook. Such interest was inappropriate and inconvenient. Still, she lingered in his thoughts like a melody he could not place. Amelia, unaware of his intermittent watchfulness, kept her focus on proving herself. When Mrs. Linton, the housekeeper, mentioned an heirloom silver ladle of the late Duchess that had been damaged years prior, Amelia offered to examine it. She had learned basic silver care from her mother, and one quiet afternoon she stood at the kitchen table, polishing and gently reshaping the delicate handle until it regained its former elegance. She left it in Edmund's study with no note, believing it unnecessary to draw attention to her involvement. Yet when he discovered it, restored and gleaming, he sought her out with uncharacteristic haste. He approached her during a midday preparation of root vegetable tarts, his expression somewhere between curiosity and caution. "Miss Hargrave," he began, holding the ladle between them. "This was repaired with considerable skill. I assume you were responsible." Amelia paused her work, uncertain whether the revelation would bring reprimand or praise. "I merely wished to restore something of value to the household, Your Grace. It seemed wrong to let it remain damaged when a small effort might revive it." His gaze softened minutely, as though her words unsettled a long-held conviction about her motives. "You had no obligation." "No," she agreed gently, "but the Duchess's belongings should be honored." The earnest simplicity of her explanation left Edmund briefly at a loss. He offered a curt nod, more flustered than he cared to admit, and retreated. Amelia watched him go, silently bewildered by the flicker of warmth in his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. Her growing presence did not go unnoticed among the staff. Though many admired her quiet competence, others viewed her with suspicion. A maid named Clara, who had long harbored an aspiration to catch the Duke's eye, whispered venomous suggestions that Amelia's noble face and graceful posture hinted at ulterior motives. "Mark my words," she murmured to anyone who would listen, "she seeks more than kitchen duty." Rumor, like wildfire, found oxygen in the servants' hall and traveled swiftly into the nearby village. By the end of the week, it had transformed into a far more scandalous narrative, suggesting Amelia had charmed her way into Ravenshire Hall with intentions far beyond cooking. The whispers reached Edmund's ears during a briefing with his steward. His response was immediate and far sterner than the staff expected. "Miss Hargrave is under my employ," he declared, voice unwavering. "Anyone who undermines her dignity undermines my authority." The room fell silent. The servants exchanged glances, astonished that he would defend her so openly. Amelia, passing nearby, overheard fragments of his statement and froze. A mixture of gratitude and apprehension churned within her. It troubled her deeply that her presence had bred such controversy, and yet Edmund's defense kindled a warmth she had not allowed herself to feel in months. Meanwhile, preparations for the approaching royal visit accelerated with relentless urgency. Ravenshire Hall would host a cousin of the king, an honor with political implications far beyond household pride. Edmund's composure tightened with each passing day, his long-guarded resentment toward political circles resurfacing in small, perceptible ways. Restless pacing in his study, clipped responses to staff, late hours spent reviewing documents in the library. Amelia noticed these changes, though she dared not intrude. Still, fragments of his history reached her through murmured servant tales, a betrayal in Parliament that had cost him influence, trust, and perhaps his faith in people altogether. One evening, while delivering a tray to the library, Amelia noticed a parchment left open on his desk. She did not approach, but the visible headline referenced the parliamentary scandal that had driven Edmund from public ambition. A sharp sympathy pierced her. Here was a man struck by loss not unlike her own, though his pride had built thicker walls around the wound. By the time she returned to the kitchen, her thoughts were no longer solely of recipes and royal protocols. She found herself pondering the quiet tension behind the Duke's eyes, the loneliness hidden beneath his strict composure, and the fragile line that separated duty from vulnerability. She had not intended to care, yet compassion rooted itself before she could tear it free. The estate hummed with growing anticipation as the royal visit drew near. Every dish required perfection, every gesture flawless. Amidst this frenzy, Amelia worked with unwavering discipline, though her heart thrummed with a strange mixture of pride and unease. For reasons she did not yet dare acknowledge, she wanted Edmund's efforts to succeed, not for the estate's reputation, but for the man who carried its weight alone. Far above the kitchen's warmth, Edmund paused again at the stairwell overlooking the lower hall. He saw her delivering orders calmly, her eyes intent, her movements confident. Something in him tightened, an uninvited awareness, a question forming that he had no wish to answer. The stage was set, though neither of them yet understood how the coming days would entwine their fates far more deeply than either intended. The day of the royal visit arrived with a sky the color of pewter and a wind sharp enough to slice through the thickest wool. Ravenshire Hall stirred before sunrise, every servant moving with a tense, rehearsed urgency. Amelia had scarcely slept, her mind consumed by the magnitude of the event and the knowledge that one misstep could cost the Duke not only his reputation, but his fragile re-entry into political favor. She oversaw the kitchen with steady poise, issuing instructions with a clarity that surprised even herself. Beneath her composed exterior, however, anxiety pulsed like a second heartbeat. Every dish bore the weight of expectation, and every moment seemed balanced on the precipice of catastrophe. As the royal entourage arrived in a flourish of polished carriages and embroidered coats, Amelia listened from the kitchen to the rhythmic echo of boots in the great hall. Edmund greeted his guests with crisp civility, though Amelia sensed from his clipped tone that the strain pressed heavily upon him. She focused on the courses, each more elaborate than the last, ensuring that timing aligned down to the second. Yet in the whirl of activity, a single oversight threatened to unravel everything. A footman delivered news that the French entree, chosen specifically to honor the royal cousin's affinity for continental cuisine, had been plated incorrectly, breaking a rigid etiquette protocol that would be interpreted as an intentional slight. The head cook paled, muttering frantic apologies, but panic had no place in Amelia's mind. Not an answer. He stepped closer, eyes searching hers with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. You exhibited knowledge one would expect of someone raised within the most exacting circles of society. A cook would not know those protocols. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, part embarrassment, part resignation. She had guarded her past with careful discretion, but concealment now seemed pointless. Before my father's death, I was often present at such dinners, she admitted softly. My mother believed a lady should understand the complexities of hosting, even if she never needed to use them. I suppose she did not imagine the circumstances in which I would eventually rely on those lessons. Edmund's expression shifted, a flicker of empathy softening the severity of his gaze. You have carried this burden alone, he murmured, and I misjudged you from the start. She shook her head. Your Grace, there is no need for apologies. I accepted my position knowing how society perceives women who fall so quickly from its graces. I did not expect fairness. His jaw tightened, a subtle sign of frustration. You should expect it, he said, almost fiercely, especially here. Silence settled between them, deep and charged, neither cold nor warm, but hovering in a liminal space where unspoken truths seemed to gather. Amelia found herself unable to look away from him. The vulnerability in his eyes, so rarely revealed, felt like an invitation she dared not accept. Before either could speak again, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead. Mrs. Linton appeared, breathless, announcing that someone from the royal entourage had observed Amelia's intervention and reported it as highly unusual. Rumors were already rippling through the staff, bending the truth into insinuation. Amelia's heart dropped as understanding struck. Her involvement, though intended to protect the Duke, now risked placing them both at the center of growing suspicion. She turned to Edmund, voice trembling. Your Grace, I should leave Ravenshire Hall. My presence threatens your reputation. No, he said instantly, each syllable imbued with a decisive force. You will not resign. But the rumors, let them talk, he interrupted, stepping nearer, his expression fierce with conviction. I will not permit falsehoods to chase away the one person who has acted with more loyalty than any ally I have known. Amelia stared at him, shaken to her core. His words delivered both protection and peril, an undeniable shift in their bond, one that could not be easily undone. And as the hall fell silent once more, the fragile line between duty and desire trembled, waiting for the moment it would inevitably break. The aftermath of the royal visit unfolded with a tension that clung to every corridor of Ravenshire Hall. Though the royal cousin departed satisfied and impressed, the murmurs that followed Amelia's intervention gathered weight like storm clouds skimming low over the moors. Amelia moved through her duties with disciplined calm, yet she could not dismiss the awareness that her presence had become the subject of scrutiny beyond her control. Servants quieted when she passed. Footmen exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Linton offered kind smiles tinged with concern. Even the air seemed thick with awaiting judgment. She wished only for silence, for invisibility, for the chance to slip away before the gossip ignited into something irreversible. Edmund, however, confronted the rising rumor with the unwavering authority of a man accustomed to command. He summoned his staff to the great hall, his tone carved from dignity rather than anger. In clear, resonant words, he dismissed every whisper of impropriety, naming Amelia's intervention not as meddling, but as a decisive act of loyalty. His stance was bold, even risky, for he placed his own credibility alongside hers, inviting scrutiny upon himself. Amelia watched from the shadows near the doorway, Her breath caught somewhere between gratitude and dread. His public defense should have reassured her, yet deep in the quiet ache that had been growing in her chest, an ache shaped by admiration she had no right to feel. Despite his firm declaration, Amelia sensed the precariousness of their situation. Reputation in England could be fractured by the gentlest push, and now Edmund had placed himself directly in the path of rumor's relentless march. That evening, as the estate settled into a fragile quiet, she made her decision. Before the sun rose, she would leave Ravenshire Hall. To stay would tether him to scandal. To go might preserve what remained of his standing. She packed her few belongings with trembling hands, each folded garment feeling like a small farewell to a life she had barely begun to rebuild. The kitchen where she had rediscovered her purpose, the corridors where she had relearned the weight of dignity, the glances exchanged with the Duke that carried more meaning than she dared name. All of it she prepared to abandon. At the first pale shimmer of dawn, she stepped outside, the morning air sharp with frost. A hired carriage waited near the gate, its wheels rimed in silver from the cold. She drew her cloak tightly around her, breathing in the stillness one last time. Ravenshire Hall loomed behind her, not as a place of service, but as a place where she had briefly felt seen. Just as she lifted her foot to the carriage step, the thunder of hooves broke the quiet. She turned, startled, as Edmund emerged from the mist on horseback, his breath forming clouds in the chill air, his hair disheveled as though he had ridden without pause. He dismounted before she could utter a word. "Miss Hargrave," he said, striding toward her, "what do you believe you are doing?" Her resolve wavered beneath the intensity of his gaze, but she held firm. "I am leaving for your sake, your grace. My presence here endangers you. The rumors have grown too bold, and I will not allow myself to become the instrument of your undoing." "You presume," he replied, voice low but tremoring with something unguarded, "that my reputation holds more value for me than your presence." He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of his breath contrasted the cold morning. "Have you not understood? Every accusation that circles this estate stems from my own failure to recognize your worth sooner." She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "Your Grace, this sentiment, whatever it is, you must not indulge it. I am a servant in your household, nothing more." "No," he said with a quiet force that arrested her breath. "You are far more." He drew in a breath, steadying himself as though preparing to cross a line he had sworn never to breach. "Amelia Hargrave, you saved my dignity, my position, and perhaps my future. But beyond that, you have reminded me of something I believed frozen beyond recovery, the capacity to trust another soul." Her tears slipped free, glistening in the fragile dawn light. Edmund continued, his tone no longer cold but fervent. "You are not merely capable. You are courageous, honorable, and astonishingly steadfast. I do not ask for your service." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle between them. "I ask for your partnership. I ask for your heart. Amelia, will you marry me?" She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. "Your Grace, Edmund, do you truly comprehend what you risk?" "I risk far less in marrying you," he answered softly, "than in allowing you to leave." A silence stretched between them, filled not with uncertainty, but with a deep, aching clarity. Amelia stepped forward, lifting her gaze to his. "Then yes," she whispered, voice breaking despite her effort to steady it. "Yes, I will." Relief washed through his features, softening the severity that had once defined him. He reached for her hands, warming them between his. "Then let us begin anew, not as duke and cook, nor as nobleman and fallen gentlewoman, but as two people who have survived the wreckage of expectation." Their wedding was held quietly in the chapel near the edge of the estate, attended only by a handful of witnesses. Amelia walked the aisle with a simple elegance that outshone the jeweled gowns of society's highest ladies, her composure radiant with a grace forged through adversity. Edmund stood waiting, not with cold distance, but with a tenderness that seemed to reshape him entirely. When the vows were spoken and their union sealed, The hallways of Ravenshire felt transformed. Servants regarded their new duchess with reverent awe, not because of her title, but because of the dignity she had carried through every trial. In the days that followed, Edmund and Amelia walked together across the frost-touched grounds, their hands intertwined, their shared silence rich with promise. Though society's judgment continued to hover at the edges of their lives, it no longer held dominion. They had forged a path through expectations' constraints and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken, bound by a love that had grown quietly, steadily, against every rule the world had written for them.